President Biden is under pressure to take visible action against Russia after a massive ransomware attack with suspected ties to the country compromised as many as 1,500 businesses worldwide. Yesterday, the president declared he would deliver a message to his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Last month, the two leaders met in Geneva, where President Biden warned of consequences if the Kremlin failed to crack down on cybercriminals operating out of its own backyard. Nancy Cordes has the latest.
It was just 3 weeks ago that Russian President Vladimir Putin told President Biden he would work with him to stem cyber attacks. And yet now the U.S. is dealing with a pair of new attacks that both appear to involve Russian entities.
We're not dealing with, honorable people. They're thieves.
Fred Vacola is the CEO of Kaseya, the Miami-based software firm that was targeted by likely Russian criminals this weekend. They used Kaseya to infiltrate around 800 to 1,500 clients, most of them small businesses. The attack forced a Swedish grocery chain to temporarily shut its doors.
Why do you think the hackers chose you?
I think they believe that small businesses wouldn't put up much of a fight.
The FBI is also investigating another new breach of a contractor for the Republican National Committee. The culprit appears to be a unit of the Russian intelligence service.
FBI is working with the RNC to determine the facts.
When we have something like this happen, we have to respond effectively.
Kirsten Todd runs the Cyber Readiness Institute. She says the latest attacks don't mean the Geneva summit was a bust.
It was important for President Biden to initiate those conversations, to put a red line in the sand.
In the case of Kaseya, the criminals are seeking tens of millions of dollars in unregulated Bitcoin.
Criminals, if they have a means of making money in a very low-risk way, you're going to see more and more very smart people do it.
All right, so for more on this, let's bring in Nancy Cordes. Nancy, you are at the White House. So, high-level talks with Russian officials next week. What more do we know about them?
Well, unfortunately, we don't know all that much right now, Anne-Marie. We've asked which U.S. officials are going to be involved in these talks, which Russian officials are going to be involved, what message the White House officials are going to be delivering to the Russians, and all of that is still under wraps. The president said yesterday that he was going to be delivering a message to President Putin about all of this, but we don't know what that message is, when it will come. We do know that when they sat down together last month, President Biden made it very clear to Putin that if Putin doesn't crack down on cyber hacking originating from Russia, that the U.S. reserves the right to respond at a time and in a manner of its choosing. But whether the U.S. is actually going to opt to do that and then risk the possibility of only escalating a cyber war of sorts, or whether they're going to continue to try to work with the Russians as they are slated to do in this meeting next week, we still don't know. We don't know what the appetite is among U.S. officials for allowing cyber attacks to continue to take place. They are getting more and more sophisticated. These ransomware hackers are asking for more and more money. And yet, at the moment, the White House still appears to be pursuing this strategy of trying to work with the Russian government to stem these attacks.
Nancy, let's talk about another important item on the president's agenda today, and that is voting rights. He and the vice president will hold separate events on the matter today. What more can you tell us about their plans and how they'll be prioritizing this topic moving forward?
So the president is going to be sitting down with a variety of leaders from civil rights groups like the NAACP and the National Urban League. The vice president, meanwhile, is doing a separate event on voting rights with the Democratic National Committee. Something that's been a little bit unusual here in the past couple of weeks is that we've heard White House officials and even the president himself repeatedly say he's going to have more to say about this next week, that he's going to be hitting the road imminently to talk about this issue, to make this issue a centerpiece of his presidency. So far, that hasn't happened. And there are a couple of reasons that is likely the case. First of all, if he's going to hit the road, he needs to be advocating for something. And the problem is that the legislation that Democrats are pushing in Congress has virtually no chance of passing. It has no Republican support. So it isn't going anywhere unless Democrats do away with the filibuster, and they don't have the votes to do that. And then beyond that, there's just the logistical reality of the fact that he has a very full plate right now with a lot of priorities sitting on it. He's got this cyber, these cyber intrusions to deal with. He's still focused on a global pandemic. He is, he's going to be talking today about the drawdown of U.S. troops in Afghanistan, and he is pushing a massive infrastructure package. And so trying to slot this issue in as well, get him around the country to talk about it, is clearly proving pretty challenging.
Nancy, you mentioned the drawdown in Afghanistan. The president's going to be receiving an update on the situation there. He seems unlikely to waver on that September 11th deadline to get U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. But increasingly, it seems like once the U.S. leaves, the Afghan government's going to have a really hard time maintaining stability for a long period of time anyways. What are the concerns coming out of the White House about this timeline and about what's going to happen to Afghanistan without the support of American troops?
Well, the big concerns is that this security breakdown that you described is already taking place even before the very last of the U.S. troops have departed the country. We're seeing the Taliban take over more provinces. There are great concerns that the Afghan government simply cannot stand up to this Taliban onslaught. And in a way, some White House officials point to that situation to argue, see, there really was no point in the U.S. continuing to stay there anyway, because we could be there forever, and this country will still be incredibly fragile the minute that we depart. So what's the point of sticking around? The president is going to meet with his advisors to get an update on the Afghanistan pullout today. And then he's slated to talk to the public to give a speech on the matter. And what he's likely to say is that he's going to reiterate his support for the Afghan government. He'll lay out how the U.S. plans to support the Afghan government in humanitarian ways, in diplomatic ways. But the reality is, as we're already seeing, that is likely not enough to prevent a Taliban takeover of the Afghan nation. But as you pointed out, it doesn't appear that there's any going back on the promise that this government has made to pull out all of its troops by September 11th. And in fact, we're almost at 100% of the troops being pulled out already.
And Nancy, before I let you go, let me ask you about Haiti, which is still reeling from the assassination of President Jovenel Moise. I know the president was asked about it yesterday. Any more coming from the White House about what could possibly be next?
Well, we do know that the State Department has gotten involved to some degree. The Secretary of State has been on the phone with the acting prime minister, and the U.S. also airlifted the First Lady of Haiti out of the country. She was also injured in the attack that killed her husband, so she was taken to Miami for treatment. The U.S. is offering to do anything it can, but the reality is that we are looking at as you well know, Vlad, as someone who has covered Haiti for decades, a rapidly deteriorating situation there, a rise in not just political violence, but gang violence, and food shortages and gas shortages, rising inflation. So it is a very combustible situation in Haiti, though at this point, beyond offering humanitarian assistance, diplomatic assistance, it doesn't appear that the U.S. is on the verge of offering any kind of security assistance as well.
All right, we'll be watching. Nancy Cordes at the White House for us. As always, Nancy, we thank you.
Sure thing.